Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is Photography Fundamentals episode 2, and in this one we're talking all about frames within frames. Frames within a frame is a great technique used in photography to send all the attention to your subject, portray a certain emotion, or add depth and dimension to your photographs. All photos have the literal frame, which is the edge of the photograph itself. From here though, we can create a second inner frame using elements within the scene to create a border around whatever you want the viewer to look at the most. What you choose to use for your inner frame could be as obvious or as subjective as you want. You can get super creative, or you can keep it nice and simple. Popular choices are man-made things such as doors, windows, archways and hallways. You can use parts of nature like trees, branches and flowers. You could use props if that was something that you're into. You can even use negative space to create a frame, and light as well, but that's getting a little bit more complex, so let's dial it back a second and jump into some more tips and advice. As mentioned, not only does it allow you to guide the viewer's eye to exactly what you want them to look at without telling them, it also just looks visually pleasing, and if done correctly can take a scene from a snapshot to a creative image. You create a sense of depth and dimension within the photo, and the use of an inner and outer frame can add a bunch more context to the entire scene. For example, without the doorway framing the view, you'd just be looking at a photo of a lake. But with the doorway, you now get an image that's twice as dynamic and says so much more about the location. You can imagine these doors being swung open and being greeted by the outdoors, and it also opens the mind to not only the view, but the building itself. When using framing, you want to try and ensure that the inner frame doesn't become more important than the subject itself. You still want to try and have the framing noticed second, and if done to a really high standard, sometimes the viewer will be so lost in the subject they won't process the framing technique for a few moments while they let their eye wander around the frame and then say to themselves, oh yeah, that's really cool, they've framed it up in that. It also doesn't have to be a complete shape like a window or a door or a square in order to be considered good framing. You can use the way certain things flow around a scene to direct the viewer into it, just like this image here, where the photographer has used the flow of the branches and the light in the distance as a lovely frame. You can use depth of field to create portions of the image that are blocked off, which again sends the viewer's eye through into the subject. And I definitely recommend experimenting and playing around with placing the inner frame in different parts of your composition. We often think as this technique as something we're looking through in order to see our subject, but you can also achieve this style just as well with stuff that sits behind your subject, like this image here where the window is clearly behind the person but still nicely frames the silhouetted guy. You could even have your subject positioned directly inside the inner frame, almost sitting or standing within that frame, or you could use the outline of one subject to nicely frame a secondary subject. For example, this L shape created by the front of the boat, nicely allowing the background boat to have its own window of space. Now this example is a little bit more subjective because it obviously doesn't jump out at you and punch you in the face and say, this is an inner frame, but it still does the same thing. It still guides the viewer's eye through and allows depth and dimension and different layers to be played in the photograph. Now, as you know, a photograph is a flat surface. However you view it, whether it's on Instagram, a computer screen, or inside a photo book, it is something we look at with a flat surface. So framing really helps to create different planes inside a photograph and almost feel like you're traveling through an image rather than just looking at a flat scene. You're also always going to have full control over your depth of field, so you can make the choice of whether you want the inner frame to be out of focus or in focus. Now this technique is definitely used the most out in the natural world when you see something natural that can be a frame like a tree branch or a building that is nicely framing your subject. However, if you're somebody that takes photos in a controlled environment, maybe studio photography, maybe lifestyle and product photography, photography, you can create frames yourself. It doesn't have to be something that already exists. As mentioned at the start of the video, you can also use light and shadow as a frame in your photograph and in a frame. And all you need to do here really is think about the light and shadow as a physical object, because obviously it's not something you can pick up, you can't hold it, you can't rearrange it, you just have to work with what's there in the scene at the time. But if you imagine that light is a physical object, imagine it was a photo frame sat in the scene, you can then use it to then position your subjects in and create again a frame within a frame. With all that being said, definitely give this technique a go if you haven't already next time you're out taking photos. If you're enjoying this series so far, please let me know in the comments down below so I know to keep doing it and continue making these videos. If you've got any topics you'd like me to cover in this series, let me know as well, and I'll definitely get around to it. But that's going to be it from me. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.